about is in the University of Colorado, what they did was they took a laboratory animal and they decided, let's hook this one of these nerves, this spinal nerve, up to two different things. Okay, the first thing they hooked this thing up to, I'm not a very good artist, okay, was the light bulb. Now, what do you think happened to this light bulb? It came on. That's right. It lit up. Now, the second thing that they hooked this thing up to was a graph. Okay, and what do you think the needle started doing? It started moving, started making sine waves. Okay, now they knew this was going to happen. This wasn't a big, aha idea for them. They knew this was going to happen. What they wanted to know was how much pressure would it take to put on the spinal nerve coming out of the holes between the vertebrae to cause a decrease in the output of the nerve impulses. Okay, so what they did was, mind you, this is a laboratory animal. They took one of those little balloons that they insert into your arteries to help open up your arteries sometimes. What they did was they took one of these little balloons and they inserted it in the hole where the vertebrae come out, or where the nerves come out, right between the vertebrae. Okay. So what they did was they said, let's start really, really small. Let's blow this balloon up to 10 millimeters of mercury of pressure. Okay, and you've had your blood pressure taken. They say 120/80 is normal. Well, 10 millimeters of mercury pressure is about the weight of a dime. Basically about the weight of this sitting on your hand or on your finger. Okay, not very much. Would everybody agree? Yeah. But you got to remember, the nerves are the softest, most pliable, most prone to injury tissues. So guess what happened? The light bulb dimmed. It barely came on. And then guess what happened to the sine waves? They actually decreased. They got smaller. They decreased in amplitude by half. So with only 10 millimeters mercury of pressure, it decreased by 50%. And they said, wow, with only 10 millimeters of mercury of pressure, we got half the nerve impulses flowing to that organ. That's like getting half the food you need, half the water you need, half the exercise you need, and half the sleep you need. Do you think that organ's going to be able to perform at its optimal level? Absolutely not. So they said, let's see how much it takes to cut this nerve, basically make this nerve dead. So they pumped it up, and they pumped it up to 20 millimeters of mercury pressure, and the light went out, and the line went beep. And you've all seen Grey's Anatomy, and you know that's not a very good sign, is it? Okay? So that's what we do, is we want to try to find where the pressure is on these nerves coming out in between the vertebrae and release the pressure so that your body can perform at its optimal level. Now, I didn't do a very good drawing here tonight, but I'm going to fix that here. Now, we had a stomach over here, right? We talked about the heart already. We had the stomach, right? Now, what's in our stomach that helps us digest our food?
Acid.
Acid. Do you know what kind of acid that is?
Hydrochloric acid.
Hydrochloric acid. You were paying attention in science class. That's good. It's actually so powerful. This hydrochloric acid is so powerful and so acidic that if we were to take it out of our stomach and pour it on our skin, it would burn a hole through our skin, through our muscles, all the way down to the bones. Okay, under normal circumstances, why doesn't this hydrochloric acid burn a hole in our stomach? What do we have in our stomach that helps protect us?
The lining.
We have the stomach lining. Correct. Now, in the stomach lining, we have these cells. There's billions and billions of these cells, and they're called peptide cells. Okay? Now, these peptide cells secrete a base, and it's called pepsin. Hence the name for the medicine, Pepsin AC. Okay? But what happens is that this peptide cells secrete pepsin, and it neutralizes the acid right along the stomach lining so the acid doesn't burn a hole in our stomach, but it's still in the stomach to help digest our food. So, let's say we had 10 millimeters mercury pressure leading into the nerve that feeds our stomach and the peptide cells. What do you think is going to happen to the pepsin production? It's going to decrease, right? And eventually, what's going to start happening? You're going to have heartburn. Maybe not, maybe not all the time, but maybe once a week. So you take some Tums or you take some Rolaids, right? And then it gets bad enough that you start to take some of the over-the-counter medicines, right? Over a period of time, if this stomach lining isn't producing the amount of pepsin it needs, it's going to start to cause what? An ulcer, right? Start to eat a hole in our stomach, okay? If the medicine that we take isn't doing it. So over a period of time, they say an ulcer is not what you're eating, but what's eating you, literally. You're eating yourself from the inside out. So let's say we take the pressure off, or we increase the pressure to 20. What's going to happen? You're going to have eventually you're going to have an ulcer, and you're going to have to be on some serious medications for it. Or what? We can do what we can to get as much pressure off the nerves as we can, right? Okay. What about the pancreas? What does the pancreas do in our body? Does anybody know? It does a lot of things.
Sugar, right?
One of its main functions is to produce and secrete insulin, which regulates our blood sugar level. Okay. Now, if you ever know anybody that's diabetic, does anybody? Yeah. What happens is they don't produce enough insulin, or their body doesn't recognize the insulin that it's making. Okay. So let's say we have 10 millimeters of mercury pressure on this nerve feeding into our pancreas. What do you think is going to be the diagnosis? Diabetes. Now, let's say this happens at a relatively young age. I was 18 or 19 years old. I got in a car accident and it put pressure on a nerve that feeds into my pancreas. If I was to go and get this fixed and checked and and corrected and get the pressure off the nerves, do you think there's going to be any permanent damage to that organ? No. Probably not. Because it's what we call a limitation of matter, just like we talked about earlier with that Ferrari. If I use the bad gas in there for a very short amount of time, there's probably not going to be any permanent damage. But if I left that bad gas in there long enough and ran that whole tank of gas through there, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to start to break down. That's what we call a limitation of matter. Now, let's say we get 20 millimeters of mercury pressure. What's going to happen? We're going to be full-blown diabetic. You're going to have to start taking insulin. Does anybody know anybody that's diabetic that takes insulin? What happens over a period of time with their insulin levels that they're taking? If you've known them long enough, you know that they probably started really low and they started to increase them. And the reason for that is because this organ is starting to break down. If I was to give you half the food you needed, half the water you needed, half the exercise you needed, half the sleep you need, you're not going to be able to perform. And that's what the organ is doing when we have pressure on those nerves feeding into the organs and tissues of our body. Okay? So as chiropractors, that's what we do. We detect and correct the place where the bone is out of place, putting pressure on a nerve. It's a subluxation, a bone out of place that puts pressure on a nerve. Okay? Now, just because the bone is out of place doesn't mean it's putting pressure on a nerve. We see that on x-ray all the time. It's called a misalignment. Does that mean that all of these bones are putting pressure on a nerve? Probably not. But there's probably one that's causing all this that's putting more pressure on the nerves than others, and it's also going to cause you to have a weak back, and the rest of the thing is just a domino effect, okay? But that's why, as chiropractors, what we do is we find a place where the nerves are being irritated and pinched, and we try to remove that interference.